Elisabeth Mute of the Sunday Telegraph, and Ana Navarro Pedro of Visão. I always get it wrong. Say it again.
It's Visão.
Visão. Okay.
You say that so well.
And
Thank you.
and Nicholas Norbrook of the Africa Report. We were saying before the break, it's not just about Greece. Italian bonds hitting a record 6.4% 10-year bonds this Friday. And political cartoonists playing to national stereotypes. The Economist does well because it's not just Greek stereotypes. As they portray the domino effect, you see the Greek statue, the Michelangelo behind it, the Spaniard, the fears of the domino effect. But really, you could say that the end of that EU summit is definitely been overshadowed by some strong remarks concerning Italy. Italy, where we may see a vote of confidence sometime next week. More members of the ruling center-right coalition deserting Silvio Berlusconi. And even though Il Cavaliere on Friday agreeing to call in the IMF for help to go over the books, that's not enough to impress the fund's managing director.
The problem that is at stake, and that was clearly identified both by the Italian authorities and by its partners, is a lack of credibility of the measures that are announced.
Lack of credibility. Tough love from Christine Lagarde. She obviously didn't hear what the Italian premier had to say a few hours earlier in Cannes.
La vita in Italia.
Life in Italy is that of a country well off. This is true at all times. Consumer spending hasn't dropped. Restaurants are packed. Holiday spots are always fully booked.
I
don't think I can say that Italy is going through anything remotely resembling a deep crisis.
Annelies Mute, do you agree with that analysis?
I think there's a disconnect between the financial crisis and the actual state of the economies that we're talking about. It is perfectly true that Italy is actually a country with a very vibrant economy, producing lots of stuff. It's produced cars, it produces planes, it's got an interesting banking system, it's got an interesting energy system. And if you look at other countries of the Eurozone, it's exactly the same thing. These are actually countries that are producing things, and where the population, the workforce, less possibly some civil services, are working pretty hard. So you have a complete disconnect between a situation of debt and a situation in which the apparatus of the state has sort of enabled a series of services that cannot be afforded anymore, and at the same time, populations that are well educated, who work well, who are very competitive, who most of the figures of competitiveness of workers in Europe are better than in America, for instance. So yes, there is a disconnect between the actual sort of working sort of populations and the countries and the crisis of liquidity. I'm not sure it's a complete crisis of economies.
A total disconnection between the successive financial crisis regarding sovereign debt, because I mean Italy, of all countries in Europe, is the one who has the biggest debt, about 120% of their GDP. Right. I mean, and no one was looking at Italy in the beginning. And when anyone in Portugal or Greece would mention, well, what about Italy? Why aren't the financial markets uncomfortable about Italy? The financial markets would answer back, Italy, the debt is mostly in the hands of the Italians themselves, so there is no problem. So why all of a sudden it is a problem? Of course, there is a problem of payments, of over debt, of having over borrowed. No qualms, no doubts whatsoever. But there is a problem of speculation. There is a problem of making money on the backs of the people of these countries. That is also absolutely clear. And we need political power. We need political leadership in order to put back this speculation.
Listen, I don't think, I think this might sound silly, but political leadership in this crisis is a contradiction in terms.
Why?
Because the question here is much more basic, much more elemental. The economy as we know it doesn't work anymore. Now, remember when Mr. Jobs passed away a few days ago, how everyone was saying, look what he did. He created a phrase from the 90s. It was called a killer application, a killer app. Like Edison, Henry Ford, he created something that affected everyone, that elementally changed everyone's life. And while we sit here and do our punditry and they're down in Cannes yibber-yabbering about Lord knows what we haven't seen here is a killer app that's going to elementally change how the economy works. You see the Occupy Wall Street protesters. This is essentially what they're calling for, but no one's come up with it. You mentioned Nouriel Roubini before. He is Dr. Doom. He's made an industry out of being Dr. Doom.
That way you're never disappointed.
You're never disappointed. And quite frankly, if you look at what's going on in Greece and Italy, more time is spent by the markets on how they can make money off of the decline. How can we profit from this decline? Then these alleged great minds on Wall Street spend time thinking, how can we change the system so this doesn't happen again? Because it really now, it's no longer my joke. It has turned into the have-yachts and the have-nots. And it's going to get a lot worse. I think this is why I say that, you know,
and that's why we need political leadership in order
But you're not getting it.
regulation.
You speak about political leadership. A journalist from the BBC, and this is a bit what you were alluding to about the question of sovereignty and all of this, read out a question in French for Nicolas Sarkozy on Friday, asking, is it not obvious that he and the German Chancellor are in fact dictating policy to Greece and Italy? Here was Nicolas Sarkozy's answer.
What I like best in your question is, it's obvious. If it is so obvious, why do you ask? It is obvious you're not expecting an answer, since you are affirming your opinion, which is by all means you're right. But I say that it is obvious you are wrong. Completely wrong. We did not want to change the governments in Greece or in Italy. It is not our role, and it is not my idea of democracy. But it's obvious that in Europe, maybe it is because you live on an island. In the literal sense, you don't quite understand the subtleties of the building of Europe. But I say this wholeheartedly. I was going to use this French expression. It is not a Spanish youth hostel. I don't know why we use this expression, which concerns the beautiful country that is Spain. There are rules, and if you do not obey these rules, it amounts to leaving Europe.
How is that going to go down on that island that Nicolas Sarkozy is referring to?
Well, Sarkozy is the leader they love to hate in Britain anyway, and this came on the just after he'd had a slanging match with David Cameron at the European Summit just before, when David Cameron wanted to be president to the discussions about how to solve the problems of the Eurozone, and Sarkozy said, you can't at the same time want to stay out of everything and then suddenly want to have an opinion on this currency you did not want to join. You have to realize that whatever Sarkozy is doing right now, he certainly is trying to get results because that's the nature of the animal. But at the same time, he is mostly trying to get re-elected. And so he wants results at the G20 because otherwise he will be the president that killed the economy or that presided over the decline of the economy. But at the same time, it always plays well in France to say sort of nasty things to the Brits. And to be quite honest, it plays extremely well in Britain to say nasty things to the French. So I don't think there's a good guy in this one. I think they're both playing to their respective domestic opinions, and they were having a fine time doing it.
And everyone's happy. Brief issues here before we go, because we're running a little short on time. All the agitation around Europe, it did spoil Nicolas Sarkozy's plan to fix what ails the wider world at the summit. But there may be those in several quarters who are quietly pleased that one man stayed under the radar, the man representing Africa. He's not exactly a household name in Europe. The acting chair of the African Unions, none other than the continent's longest-serving strongman. Where is he? He's over there all the way to the left of your screen. There he is. We're talking about President Teodoro Obiang Nguema. He's ruled the tiny, oil-rich former Spanish colony of Equatorial Guinea for 32 years. He's about to push through a referendum that should keep him in power another 14 years. Now, all this coming as investigators in both France and the US are probing the family's wealth. Nicholas Norbrook, perhaps you can talk us through some amateur video footage that we have from Paris's posh Avenue Foch last month. It was posted on YouTube. Tell us what's going on here.
Well, this is a fantastic collection of luxury sports cars owned by, we think, the son of said president at the Cannes feast.
Who could become the next vice president.
Indeed, Theodorin. He's actually, the son has now been given an ambassadorship at UNESCO, which gives him some kind of diplomatic immunity. This is the same UNESCO which was supposed to give out a prize on governance, the Obiang Prize. They've now quietly kicked that into touch. It's very strange that he would be here at all. He has the African Union rotating chairmanship, so protocol, suggested that he had to be. But there are some excellent photos of G20 leaders trying not to be photographed with him. President Obama looks very glum with his hand in Obiang's hand. So yeah, it's a very strange thing, and I mean, maybe it makes everyone laugh, but sadly, what's going on in Equatorial Guinea is, along with perhaps Eritrea and Zimbabwe, one of the more brutal and repressive states in Africa, and yeah, it's good that finally these cases are starting to get off the ground.
And on the World This Week Facebook page, Blessed from Harare in Zimbabwe writes, "Why Equatorial Guinea, of all the countries in Africa to be there? This G20 summit is totally a joke." Now, you mentioned UNESCO. Who says that UNESCO is boring? You mentioned banks no longer being boring. Same can be said of UNESCO. This week, it became the first international body to recognize Palestine as a state, prompting both Israel and the United States to yank their funding. But Washington's position is not as clear-cut as it seems. Israeli daily Haaretz reports that the U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East and the U.S. Ambassador to Israel have told British Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's aides that Washington objects to Israel freezing tax income that it collects for the Palestinians. Anne-Elisabeth Moutet, it's a tricky one for the Americans dealing with this push towards statehood by the Palestinians.
Well, it's especially a tricky one because, first of all, I think it's law in America. The American Congress will not vote, will withdraw funding of any body giving representation to the Palestinians before a peace accord is reached. And again, we are in an electoral year. It's going to be a busy 2012. Democrats and Republicans know perfectly well that they've got large constituencies who are completely pro-Israel. Not so much the Jewish vote, which is tiny and which is fairly evenly divided, but the very large evangelical vote. 70 million Americans describe themselves as evangelicals, and these are people who are completely pro-Israeli and they vote. Yeah. So that's a really, what was interesting about this vote in UNESCO was the fact that France, after saying that it was too early, it was premature, it was not the time, not the arena to vote Palestine into a UN body, suddenly voted in favor. And there are many reasons that have been advanced about why France voted in favor of admitting Palestine, most of which had to do with Nicolas Sarkozy trying to get one back on Barack Obama after the conditions for access to money market funds in America were taken away because of technical questions from European banks, especially French banks, operating in America.
Don't you think Obama's going to go for Netanyahu once he gets himself re-elected?
That's a big if.
It is a big if.
He's got to get himself re-elected first.
But then who's he going to run against? I mean, no.
And the problem, it's bigger. It has been forgotten here in Europe because of this Euro-Greek tragedy. But there is a lot of talk in Israel about making preventive hits against Iran. And this is a huge problem in international relations, and it is a huge problem for the United States as well. So this is behind the scenes of what happened at UNESCO as well. And
we'll obviously that Iran story is going to come to a head in the coming week when the latest report comes out on its nuclear program out of Vienna. Before we go, on October 31st, the 7 billionth human was born. That's, of course, an estimate. So our claims of where he or she saw the light of day. The United Nations has been sounding the alarm bell about us soon reaching 10 billion. But that trend may shift. Der Spiegel spoke to the Vienna-based International Institute for Applied System Analysis, and they say it's all going to topple out in the next few decades. And we could even show you the graph that says that the population growth will, in fact, stall in most places. In fact, come the year 2040, Africa will be the only place where mothers will be having more than 2.2 children. So predictions of the population growing exponentially forever are being contested, Craig Kopeitis. Your thoughts on us reaching 7 billion?
This is why we're in Equatorial Guinea. This is why he came to the summit. You know, he's another dictator with an oil field. It's all about resources. That's the way I look at this thing. This is why the Chinese are in Africa scooping up resources. You have all this growth in population, you have to feed them, you have to house them, you have to give them energy. And that's where the crunch is going to come. I think the real way to track this going down the road, let me be my market Bloomberg guy for a moment, is always tracking commodity prices. You know, it's a lot of people, I think, by any estimate, right? 7 billion, that's a lot of people. You know, it's almost up there with the Greek debt.
All right, 7 billion and counting. We're going to have to, unfortunately, leave it there. We're out of time. But I want to thank Craig Kopeitis, Ana Navarro-Pedro. I want to thank Nicholas Norbrook and Elisabeth Moutet. And thank you for being with us here for The World This Week. Stay with us. Coming up next, it's time for business. Luke Brown will be here. He'll be checking in with Marcus Carlson, who will have the final word from that G20 summit in Cannes.